Have you ever met someone who was so committed to their own lies, so bought into what they were saying, that even they were caught off guard by their own lies? Even they couldn't see through the own webs that they were weaving. It's a fascinating thing. I'm sure you've experienced it. It goes along with the idea of being a pathological liar, but it happens far beyond just someone who is actually a pathological liar. It's these lies that we turn into truth, a type of truth in the sense that within your system, within you as the person articulating the lie, to you it's functionally, it's artificially true. Let's talk about this. Welcome to the TLDR Christianity podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to the Patreon or the Give, Send, Go, linked in the description. Welcome to the TLDR Christianity podcast, where we like to make big ideas easy to pick up. That's the goal here. We want to take something that might seem too complicated, that might seem unable to really understand, break it down for you. Let us know how we're doing. Let me know. Give me that feedback. I want to hear what's working, what isn't. On that note, next Monday, so on February 24th, we're going to be doing a live stream. I've said this before, want to reiterate this. I'm going to be trying to do a live stream once a month, mainly to cover questions from the podcast, question from that month's episodes of the podcast. Now, this first one is going to be on Monday. There's going to be a link in the description that'll take you right to it. You can get a notification, subscribe to that, get a notification so that you can, be alerted when it goes live. You can ask questions then. You can leave any questions ahead of time. It doesn't have to be about the previous month's episodes, but that is going to be the focus. The time for this first one is going to be 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. And for anyone that's Eastern and wondering why it's so late, the 5:30 Pacific should tell you why. It's really hard to find a time that covers the entire U.S. Sorry for those who are not in the U.S. There are a few of you. But yeah, so that's going to be that. That's linked in the description. So you can go straight to where the live stream will be. Now, what are we going to be talking about? Like I said, we're talking about this idea of someone who has woven such a web of lies that even they believe it, to the point. Now, there's a self-deception that occurs. There's a self-deception that goes on with people. Obviously, someone doesn't believe something if they don't believe it, if they know it to be false. So people do what? They suppress the truth and unrighteousness, as Romans says, and they replace that truth with a lie. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. This idea of where people's doubts are rooted and their commitment to their own false ideas. This is beyond that. And why I want to bring this up is because this is such a prevalent thing nowadays. This is such a prevalent thing. I think it's worth understanding because, again, it goes into... So it's sort of going to be the theme of this season of the podcast. We're going to slip in these episodes that talk about communication. How do we successfully communicate with someone that has just a radically different, radically opposed view from us? Because our goal is to be able to communicate with people. How do you preach the gospel if you can't communicate to someone? And that's the important thing. It's a dirty word, contextualization, because it's abused so much. But if you want to talk about contextualization, that's what it is. I brought up Paul on Mars Hill in that same episode, and which, if you haven't, linked in the description, go listen, go get the context for this sort of series, more of a theme that we're touching on between other episodes. But I talked about Paul on Mars Hill. That's contextualization. He looked at the culture. He looked at the people that he was trying to reach enough to understand a starting point. Hey, they got this idol to this unknown god. They worship literally anything and everything to the point where they're covering their bases by having an unknown god. I'm going to use that as a starting point for communication. Now, what was he not afraid to do? He was not afraid to give them the truth, and he gave them the truth to the point where he insulted them. They were offended by what he had to say because it clashed with their beliefs. It clashed with what they believed. So this is what we need to talk about. We need to understand. Again, this idea of artificial truth. Artificial truth. Now, what do I mean by this? Is that a common term? Is that term used? No. That's a term that I'm using to be able to communicate some ideas to you. But I think you'll see that it's a useful term for what we're talking about. So this idea of artificial truth, again, is someone that has gone beyond simply, I believe this false thing because I'm suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, to the point where they're so caught up in it, so wrapped up in their own lie. If it were to be exposed, they would feel like they successfully duped themselves. Because functionally they have. It's them suppressing the truth so hard and so fully and so desperately replacing it with something else that they end up adopting it in a way that it's not true. It's not factually true. It does not line up with reality. It is not truth. It is not something that corresponds with reality. It doesn't line up. But for all intents and purposes, to them it is functionally true. It's artificially true. This is a concerning thing. And what do I mean by artificially true? Because I said, hey, it's not actually true, and then I keep saying truth. Again, artificial is the key word. Artificial, fake. It is fake truth. To them, their mind, their body, everything about them is processing it as if it were 100% immutably, unchangeably true. The problem comes into play in the artificial part. They've had to create a artificial space in which this truth lives. It's not truth that's rooted, connected to reality. It's truth disconnected from reality. It's floating above. They might be able to explain anything and everything about their system of beliefs, whatever it is, whatever point they're defending. They might be able to display so many things about it, display internal consistency, so many things. But what they won't be able to do is bridge that gap. It's floating above the ground. It never touches earth. It's when it becomes a point where it will affect them, to the point physically affecting them. There's someone listening, I've talked about this with, about a person in particular. And if you're listening I think you'll understand this. Talking to the person that had this conversation with. Don't want to mention who, because then that might reveal some things. Keep privacy private. But this person, we're having a conversation about this person and how their beliefs impact how his beliefs impact him. We're just gonna say Bill for the sake of having something to put on, a label to put on there. But so Bill has this belief system. He's bought into it to the degree where it impacts him. It affects him. It changes how he processes things. And when confronted with contrary beliefs, it affects how Bill processes things. But what's worse is when confronted with the truth, suddenly, and here's the thing about it. Again, you can go to Romans. We suppress the truth and unrighteousness, but he makes it clear that the truth was revealed. The invisible God made himself known through creation itself. You cannot exist in this reality without having a connection to God, without understanding what truth is. Then you suppress it. So even just, and this is one of the problems when it comes to things like transgenderism. They're confronted daily. The existence of humans, merely seeing humans walking around, confronts you with the truth. So you have to suppress it. So it's not simply the explicit declaration of the truth that confront these people, but it's just the implicit declaration of the truth. Someone walks by you, a person walks by you, that is either a male or a female, and our minds know this and immediately process that. And then you're confronted with, but that's not my reality. My reality says there's something else. I have to change that. I have to challenge that. Because their reality, their truth has gone so far beyond, to the point where when confronted with reality, when confronted with truth, it leads to anxiety. And then needs coping methods. Bill needs coping methods to handle that. That's a destructive cycle. And that anxiety expresses itself, interestingly enough, corresponds with when truth is confronting them. When Bill is confronted by truth, Bill is more likely to have an anxious episode. Now, what's the real problem? It's not anxiety, it's dissonance. You're being confronted with the truth. The truth is confronting, in this case, again, truth for confronting Bill. But Bill's belief system has been constructed, internalized, fortified to the point where it controls, it's turned into something that exists, that is artificially true. It exists in a capacity because now it has control over Bill. It can change how Bill responds to things. It can hurt Bill. Boy, this sounds a little bit more abusive than it does anything else. I wouldn't want truth that's abusive. But you might be listening to go, okay, yeah, I understand. We talked about already, did an episode, we talked a lot about your truth, my truth, that arbitrary post-truth idea. This postmodernism really unleashed. There is no truth, that it's whatever we want to believe. I get that, Kyle. You're basically saying the same thing. No, I'm not. It's the next stage of postmodernism. Because again, postmodernism is post-truth. It's beyond truth. There is no objective truth And in fact, there's just no universal, there are no hard truths. There are no solid truths. There are no truths that exist out there evenly for every person. There's just no truth in general besides what is true for you. But then we go beyond that. This is one of the things we need to talk about. What is the next phase? Well, what's beyond that, where we're getting into, is the neo-pagan era. And we see people that hold to a postmodern view, but then are evangelizing for it. And, you could go down a rabbit trail about, critical race theory. And in particular, its origin in critical theory in particular, and just how that does that, how that takes this idea of postmodernism to the next level, where then it creates, well, now we have to privilege certain truths and then evangelize for those. And again, this is where this artificial system comes in. If there's no truth at all, if we're going to be able to communicate, me and you, if we're going to be able to communicate, then something has to exist. So something exists, then again, confronting with reality, we know that there's some truth. So then we start picking and choosing. We artificially construct what truth is. And then we evangelize for it. Let me tell you this little story, because I think this will illustrate a good portion of it as we continue on. I used to work in an animal shelter. One of the most fun jobs I've ever had, one of the most frustrating jobs I ever had. I went into that thinking I knew a bunch about animals and having to be confronted with reality, confronted with truth that I really didn't know diddly squat. Not nearly as much as I thought I did. And what was my response to that? Well, objective reality exists. I don't know about this, even though I thought I did. I'm going to learn. And I went from someone that was surprisingly ignorant, surprising to me that I was as ignorant as I was, to someone that was one of the more knowledgeable. Among the general staff, I became known for my knowledge. Why? Because I applied myself to reality. I said, I'm going to learn about this. I need to. This is part of my job. So I went from someone that, I'll tell them an embarrassing story. This isn't even the main point of this. It gets fun here in a second. And by fun, I mean not fun at all. But it was my grounded Christian beliefs that made me successful, because I was able to root myself in reality, as opposed to the more liberal-minded people that would struggle. But early on, I adopted out a dog. Now, there was a system. It was the policy of the shelter was adopt, adopt, adopt. You're not there to say no. As a counselor, adoption counselor, you're not there to say no. You're there to say yes, unless there's some radical policy, thing that something to a much more extreme level. And so I was like, okay, we're basically just there. I don't really have much control. Person comes in, they want this dog. There's no big red, there's nothing on paper that just says no. There's no restrictions. Sometimes there'll be restrictions on the animals. Like, hey, this dog is not good with other dogs. This cat's not good with kids. And so if they have one of those things, we'll kind of politely go, let's look over here. But got out this dog, had no restrictions on him. Problem is, he did have a bunch of restrictions. They just weren't labeled. Some were just kind of obvious and known. Some just weren't put on there yet. But he definitely should not have gone to an apartment with a cat, because he was a husky of huskies. Now, if you don't know about actual huskies, like one that is not now, I mean, this goes to another thing. A lot of huskies are fake. Yeah, there are people have bred some dogs to look like huskies, so you get these fake huskies. It's a whole other thing. But then a lot of huskies are kind of toned down to a certain degree. This guy was a husky of huskies. There was a cat in the house. In the apartment. He was stuck in the apartment. So he's like, my instincts, I was bred to catch my own food because I was bred for an environment that's very harsh. So I have a very high prey drive. Okay, well, there's some food and there's a door between us. That's not an obstacle. Tore down the door to get the cat. Cat survived. Apparently someone came home, was able to save the cat. The people came back. They didn't blame me. This was one of those perfect learning things. It was such a failure. But the people came back and they're like, hey, that wasn't on you. And you were really good to us. In fact, I eventually did find him a really good dog. But it was something that woke me up, that went, okay, I need to learn what's going on. And I did. And I went from a bad adoption counselor to the lead adoption counselor. I was specifically pulled out when there was a difficult, they're not customers. I forget exactly even what we call them because we didn't want to say customer. But yeah, I remember one guy in particular came in. I likely started a big fight between him and his girlfriend, which was not my fault. It was from what he said. I just happened to accidentally pull that out. Not accidentally. I pulled something out because I was observant. And then it turned out that it was more interesting than I thought it was. And the girlfriend did not agree. But this guy was cussing out the customer service people. He was just a absolute jerk. And he wanted this dog that he had no business. Nothing about his dog had a bunch of restrictions on him. He was not a bad dog. He just definitely needed the right home. And it was not this guy's home. Well, I was able to eventually have a conversation with him. And we were able to get him to understand. Basically, I had to get him to understand that I was protecting him, not even the dog. Not that he's going to get hurt, but making it clear on things. Finally, he was able to get it through to him. And not only does, I think he shook my hand before he left, but then I walked out to another building and he was leaving, saw me across the parking lot, waves to me. Gosh, it's amazing what you can do when you actually ground yourself in reality. But here's where the story gets really fun. Because we had a work seminar. Oh boy, can you imagine a work seminar for a animal shelter? Well, the main theme was about compassion fatigue, burnout. How do you deal with burnout? And they call it compassion fatigue. And anyone that's in medical, fire rescue, law enforcement, so many other things, you probably have heard that term before. But it's just the term for burnout that's used in any place that's caring for generally people. In this case, it was animals. But the exhausting part was not the animals; it was the people. But We have the seminar on compassion fatigue. So now you got two layers. You're probably going, okay, I can only imagine what a seminar, mandatory work seminar at an animal shelter about compassion fatigue is like. And it's worse than you think. It's worse than you think. And it made the majority of the people really upset. Because most of the people, despite being functionally, their ideological framework, how they relate to truth was postmodern. But they didn't have the luxury of living in a postmodern mindset. They had to deal with reality and they had to deal with facts. So that despite having a postmodern relationship with truth, they still had to touch ground. They still had to understand and deal with the reality of things day to day. They were the ones that were dealing with bad adopters. They were the ones dealing with bad situations. The county's animal control was also run out of there, so we got to see bad situations. They're the ones that are dealing with all the drama. They're the ones that are dealing with tragic situations. They're the ones that are actually dealing with. They don't have an option but to understand reality is real, even if their relationship to truth is to functionally deny it. But you can guess that the leadership getting paid more money, not having to deal with those kind of things, dealing in a more theoretical capacity most of the time, you can imagine that they had a different perspective on reality. They could afford to live a little bit more consistently. And so they brought someone in. And because, oh my goodness, it's the board chairman was he was a super progressive. Big surprise there. But, definitely I was a hippie and now I've turned into a modern progressive. And so he brings in this lady, this professor, and she's talking to us. And she's passing on information to us, trying to get us to see things her way, trying to transmit truth from herself to us, listening, doing these activities with us. And if people are just getting frustrated, none of them know why they're getting frustrated. We had a 15-minute break, and everyone, just again, all the regular staff members were just frustrated and outside and openly complaining. And then all the mainly the more upper management, there's some like lower level people that are a little bit more grounded, but we're just like, off on their side, like fawning over this lady. And then everyone else is just miserable. And they don't know why they're miserable. They're trying to figure it out. But here's the thing, going to artificial truth. This lady that's what she was saying. She's saying, you know how you deal with compassion fatigue? You know how you deal with burnout? You know how you deal with seeing bad situations? Oh, you construct intentionally, artificially construct a different situation, declare it true, and lie to yourself until you believe it. Again, now, to jump ahead a tiny bit, after this whole thing, I went up and asked her, and she admits, this was an interesting experience for me, because I've never met someone who admits and takes on the label of a postmodernist. And she did. So at least she was honest about her insanity. Now, I really wanted to go to some of the upper management and just be like, hey, you do realize she scammed you, because in her belief system, you can't actually transmit knowledge objectively from one person to another. Yet that's what she was doing for the entire 3 hours or however long it was. But I didn't end up doing that because I felt that was a little bit too snarky and there are too many other things. There are too many real situations to deal with at the time. But yeah, that's what she was doing. She was telling us as an example. She's like, oh, you have two choices. This dog comes in and he's in rough shape. And, she set up a little bit of a situation, like how the dog looks. And it's just obvious that there were problems, and this animal needs some help. And so she's like, "Oh, you have no choice." She makes the choice into two different people, and you have the one person, and she's looking at the dog, and she's like, and she makes the choice. She goes, "Oh, he," and she made up this story about how the dog, the just had gotten loose, and um just kind of like things had gone wrong because of that. But then he's here, we're taking care of him, and there's nothing actually bad happened, and blah blah blah. And then you have she's talking about, and this person, she's talking about that the experience the dog had. She's so happy and she's excited, and it's all good, and it's positive. And then the other person interrupts her and is upset and starts going off about how this dog was abused and wasn't taken care of, and but she doesn't know that. So let's be person one who assumes the positive because it's good, and then we feel better about it. And that is why people were upset. They couldn't grasp the whole picture. But why they were upset is they were coming out of that going, but if the dog was abused, then it was abused. If it has something medically wrong with it, then it has something objectively medically wrong with it. And we need to treat it. That's why we have a vet. If the dog has some sort of behavioral thing, that's why we have a behavior team. If there's something wrong with the animal, then we need to take care of it. If the animal is a danger to people, we need to take care of it. That's why we have, there's a color coding system, and there was some behind the scenes stuff on that, but so many volunteers, and we had to keep them safe. So they were only certified to handle certain color coded animals. And sometimes we'd have to step in and write certain notes that functionally meant, volunteers, you're not allowed to touch this animal. You will get your hand bitten. Or worse. Or you'll get someone else injured. We had to live in reality. And reality sometimes sucked. But sometimes it was really good. But lying to ourselves was not the solution. Now, it goes beyond that. Because she wasn't just saying, hey, lie to yourself. Again, she was trying to evangelize a system of artificial truth to us. Because again, it went so far beyond. You are supposed to create this system that has layers around it, defensive layers, to keep out any other possible reality. That whatever positive thing you make is truth. It is now supposed to have control over you. It is now supposed to affect you. It is truth. It is truth. And that's really what she wanted, because she wanted something hard and fast and real. She wanted objective truth. She just saw a route to artificially get there. She wanted us to say, I am God, so what I say is true. That's what she was advocating for. And that's what it comes down to. This idea of artificial truth is someone making themselves God, arbiters of what is and is not objectively true. And then this artificial truth, this is where the rubber meets the road. You can then take it and transmit it to others. This is where you can then evangelize others into your belief system, because it's now solid. It just happens to be floating above the ground. So what does this matter when it comes to liberal ideologies coming into the church, progressive ideologies coming into the church, woke ideologies coming into the church? How does this connect? Excuse me. Because we're dealing with people that have done that. We're dealing with people that have this artificial truth, and they've constructed it, and it's so solid and so impactful and again functionally true in the sense that it legitimately has power over them. They've created a beast that now exists. It just happens to be a ghost. It's artificial. It's fake, but it's also really there. It's fascinating. There's a whole rabbit trail about development of truth as we age that I want to go down, because I can remember way too many things from way too young of an age, but we don't have time for that right now. But again, that's the kind of people we're dealing with when it comes to not your average person. You're going to run into that again. Your average person, you're going to run into people that you start to confront them with truth. It doesn't matter how loving, this is an important thing. It doesn't matter how loving it is. And they will have a painful reaction to it that goes beyond just someone that disagrees. No. This is someone that's, again, it goes beyond. It's actually causing them a degree of discomfort, pain. It should, someone saying, hey, I disagree with you. I believe X and you believe Y. That shouldn't cause someone pain. Yet these people do. But the real problem is the teachers, the evangelists of these beliefs within the church, because they don't really have a choice but to have fully turned this into artificial truth. It's not simply, hey, this is true for me. This is true for me, but, whatever's true for you, it might be different. It's, hey, this is true for me. Now you must adopt it as well. And it's just that people, I post updates on the Patreon, and post an update. I'm going to be talking about continuing the Preston Sprinkle series, and we're going to be looking at just how he interacts with the gospel. Does he present the gospel? What does he think about the gospel? What is the gospel in his words? Because there's a lot of questions around that I didn't realize were there until someone kind of sparked that in me. Then research has already been very fascinating and interesting. But yeah, this is what I would say about Preston. When he interacts with people that agree with him or tolerate him, it's fine. He's fine. But when he interacts with someone like Jared Moore, oh boy, did he get nasty. Which violates a whole bunch of things that he has. Oh, you're going to treat people that, we'll be looking at it, but he has for his Center of Faith, Sexuality, and Gender, they have an About Us, and one of the points in it, so important that's in their sort of a doctrinal statement. It's in there that, we don't misrepresent, we don't speak ill, essentially, of our anyone who disagrees with us. Yet he was willing to go there with Jared, to the point where he declared Jared not to be a Christian. Again, I've talked about that before. Rules for thee, but not for me. Preston Sprinkle, I think that was episode 2 of that series. And he declared Jared Moore. He said that he is someone who holds to a, quote, fundamentally different brand of Christianity than me, end quote. That's what Preston said. Now, again, I mentioned before, if you hold to a fundamentally different Christianity, well, what are the fundamentals? What are the essential beliefs of Christianity? Well, it's the gospel. If you have a fundamentally different belief about Christianity, you have a fundamentally different gospel. If you have a different gospel, you have a false gospel. You are a heretic. You are not a believer. That is a much nicer way of putting Jared outside the church. But why do I mention that? It's because he really seems to be someone who does have this artificial truth. And when he gets confronted with it, actually gets directly confronted with it, he gets upset to the point where he's willing to just throw someone, he violates his own beliefs, his own stated beliefs, and cast someone out. Now, you might go, well, aren't you saying that there are problems with Preston? Aren't you implying that he may or may not be a Christian? Yeah, but I'm open about it. And that's one of the reasons I did the start of that series is I want to get to the bottom of things. I want to get to the truth. I mean, anyone that's been following along, you're probably sick of me saying this, but that's why I've reached out to him. That's why I've offered to go meet him. Not even for an on-the-record conversation. We can do that too, but literally, he can just talk to me. Tell me whatever he wants to tell me. To have a conversation. But let's end this just talking quickly about what does this mean? What does this mean for communication? It's just another piece of the puzzle and things to be aware of. You're going to run into people that just even the idea of a conversation with a Christian is going to be impossible normally. And it's going to be work. Really, the biggest thing you're going to be able to do is just show the consistency of a faithful Christian walk. Show the power of the gospel in transforming people. Display things through your living testimony of what Christ has done. And just keep that relationship going with that kind of person. Because if it's painful for them to even bring up the conversation, and painful not in the sense of like, oh, I'm wounded by this, but painful in the sense of I'm agitated because you're confronting me with truth. You can never back down from the truth. But you just got to understand that the ability to have conversation, direct, immediate conversation is going to be stunted. And it's going to take you work to get around that. It's going to take you work to establish actual lines of communication. And again, the biggest thing that for those people, it's the whole idea of killing with kindness, essentially. You want to open the door to conversation. Well, that's not going to happen normally. It's when, if you're on social media at all, you've seen it. Two people just absolutely talking past each other. Doesn't matter what's said. They're just going to not be able to talk or agree. That's just a reality of a lot of things nowadays. It's the people that are living in this artificial truth bubble. Anything outside of it, it contradicts it. It just, boom, bounces off the bubble. But they get extremely agitated about it. Again, it's another piece of the puzzle of understanding the people that we're trying to communicate with, understanding where they're coming from, why they're behaving the way that they are, why they're framing things the way they are, why they're misrepresenting you the way that they are, because that's going to be a big thing. And when you understand the why and the how of their response, especially again, it's often going to be in misrepresenting you, you're going to have a lot better base for how you react to that. Because one of the big problems is they're going to try and draw you into a fight. Because their biggest thing they can do is score a moral victory, moral victory. They want to be the one that's on the high ground, which is why you see a lot of these people essentially bait a problematic conversation and then take the high road immediately. If you understand their relationship with truth, you understand that their artificial construction of reality that's even deceiving themselves, being deceived and deceiving others. If you understand that and understand the way that they're kind of jabbing out, but then pulling back like they're the victim, like they're just so good, so righteous, you're going to be able to then better respond to that, especially if there are other people watching, that will then turn the tables a little bit. Once you know the way that they're trying to deceive, once you know that the foundation that they're resting upon, you can be a much more efficient, effective communicator and responder. But a lot of times when it comes to actually directly communicating with the person, it's really just going to be a time game of showing them the consistency of what Christ has done in your own life. That's not an easy answer. Again, that doesn't mean you don't declare the truth, but you know that you're playing the long game. You're not dealing with, conversation is not going to happen immediately because they're so deceived. So deceived. You're not even talking about, I talked about different types of doubt: intellectual doubt, volitional doubt, doubt based on just will, and emotional doubt. That's not the kind of thing we're talking about with this artificial truth. You have to get them to break out of their own lies, break out of that to the point where they're actually willing to objectively look at reality before you even then get to the point of doubt. Because they've moved, they've created a shell and made it so thick, made the walls of that shell so thick, you're not doing anything until that shell crumbles. And then you can deal with, okay, now what kind of doubt does this person have? What kind of relationship to truth do they have? You're gonna have to understand just their fundamental, basic view of truth, how they're interacting with things. Do they have this artificial truth before you could do anything else? Patience is not fun, but that's really going to be, it's a siege. It's a siege. It's a siege, not a battle. And that's an important thing. You got to understand when something's a battle, it's going to be fought and won. It's going to be decided same day. And when something's a siege, it's going to just take time. Take time. And you got to commit yourself. You got to say, okay, I can do this. I am here and I can be committed. This also helps us with understanding the difference between someone who is deceived by a false teacher and someone who is a false teacher. But that's going to be a conversation for another time. Already got an episode planned for that. But with all of that said, I think it's time to draw this to a close. I want to again remind you that on Monday, we're going to be doing that live stream. It is linked below. You can go to that link and set up a reminder for yourself. And the live streams are always going to be hosted there. So if you're not normally on YouTube, you might want to still subscribe to that live stream, where the channel for that live stream. It's always going to be on that channel specifically. So go there. And if you would like to support the podcast, you can. There's a link to a Patreon and a Give, Send, Go. It's your choice on how you want to interact. I like Give, Send, Go, but it doesn't have that sort of direct feedback the same way. If you have other ideas of what I should do, let me know. If you have feedback in general on this episode or others, give me that feedback. I want to be making this something that is effective and useful, not just me speaking to myself. That might even be an episode of itself. Of how do we communicate? Far too often we just speak to ourselves, which is really hard when you're doing like a podcast and you're just staring at a camera. I'm not staring at a person, but I hope this has been useful. I hope this has been effective. Let me know. Give me some feedback because I want this to be a tool, a resource, something of value, not just another voice. I want to actually be providing value. The last thing, and what I like to periodically remind you, I am not a replacement for your local church. I am not a replacement for your pastor. You commit yourself to your pastor, your local church, your local believers before you ever go to me for advice. It's also one of the dangers of the live stream. I don't want to be the person that gives you answers on things that you should be going to your pastor for. Something that you should be going to mature Christians who have proven their walk. You need to be learning for the people that are around you. So I want this to be an educational resource, not something that's replacing relationships. With all of that said, thank you for joining me on this episode of the TLDR Christianity podcast. Remember, God has been so very good to us, so go bring glory to his name.